Good evening from WFAE FM 90.7. I'm Ruby Britt Height, WFAE's Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships. On behalf of our President and Chief Content Officer, Jadon Marshall, we welcome you to this evening's program, Voices on Immigration, a multicultural panel discussion. WFAE is a major source of news and information for the Charlotte region and one of the country's leading public radio stations. Our mission is to present journalism that informs, enriches, and inspires. Our vision supports a more knowledgeable and engaged community grounded in our shared community, in our shared humanity. It is from that shared humanity perspective that we are presenting tonight's conversation. Voices on Immigration is to educate the community on what is happening surrounding immigration with all the changes in policy. Moderated by journalist Julian Berger, this live webinar will explore the impact of recent executive actions, shifting policies, and state-level legislation on local immigrant communities. He'll speak with diverse speakers from our Charlotte community on the impact of immigration under the new presidential administration. We do have a question and answers function in the webinar, so you as our guests can put your questions in the Q&A box. If you want to be anonymous, you can make your name anonymous before you send something in. This is a 60-minute discussion with the last 30 minutes for questions. This conversation will be recorded on Facebook Live, and we also plan to put it on YouTube. We welcome you to this respectful and considerate conversation. Now, let's hear briefly from WFAE's Executive Director of Membership and Major Gifts, Candace Johnson. Candace?
Good evening. Thank you, Ruby. We'd like to share with you, this beat programming is possible thanks to support of our WFAE supporters who make this diverse work possible. Your presence tonight highlights the importance of creating this critical space to have these conversations. And if you find these conversations of value, I'd love to invite you to become a member of WFAE. You'll find a QR code on the slide before you. And should you want to become a member, please activate this QR code. We'd love for you to join the WFAE family. At this time, I will pass the virtual mic to Julian Berger, our race and equity reporter who covers immigrant communities in Charlotte. Julian?
Thank you, Candace, and hello to everybody here tonight. My name's Julian Berger, and I'm WFAE's Race and Equity Reporter. I cover Latinos and immigration. I'd like to welcome our three panelists here this evening that will be speaking on immigration. First off, we have Stefanía Arteaga. She's a dedicated organizer and strategist, deeply involved in advancing immigrant rights in North Carolina. She's the co-founder of Comunidad Colectiva and Carolina Migrant Network, and she has tirelessly pushed back against immigration and customs enforcement, also known as ICE, their collaboration with local law enforcement. Next, we have Alex Bui. He's the president of the Vietnamese Association of Charlotte. Alex was born in southern Vietnam towards the end of the Vietnam War. His family fled to Malaysia, and he was later sponsored to come to America. He is currently working with Atrium Health to develop a health initiative for the community and is assisting with refugee resettlement in Charlotte. Last but not least, we have Ayat Hamza. Ayat is a first-generation immigrant who is passionate about immigrant justice and the law. She currently works as an immigration attorney at the International House Immigration Law Clinic, where she helps low-income immigrant families traverse the complicated legal landscape. Thank you all for being here this evening. My first question is, everyone here in the United States has an immigrant story, whether you're first generation or your ancestors are from elsewhere. Let's start with Stefanía. Stefanía, what's your immigration story?
Thank you, Julian. And thank you for everyone who's watching. So I, like many young people, came to the U.S. as a child. I am originally from El Salvador, San Salvador, and my family has a long history of migrating to the U.S. due to our unfortunate civil war that lasted various decades. My family's migration to the U.S. started in the 70s. And so migration has been a part of my life for a very long time. I initially moved to Massachusetts and lived under the largest workplace raid under the Bush administration in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and resettled in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2008, as we started seeing a different initiative from the sheriff's department in particular on how they were going to behave and treat their immigrant neighbors. So as someone who has had very challenging life experiences as a result of immigration policy in the US, I've always been very interested in figuring out how to, as a directly impacted person, create mechanisms for resistance and for support.
Thank you, Stefanía. Alex, how about you? What is your immigrant story?
Well, mine, like many Vietnamese Americans, started back in the conflict with the Vietnam War. So this year is a big milestone. This marks the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. So in 1975 is when the U.S. troops pulled out from Vietnam. So our family escaped under dark of night with our private ships, escaping pirates from Southeast Asia and making it all the way down to Malaysia. So we were fortunate. The story I've heard from other around 75, I escaped around 79. And I was about almost 3 years old. The people in 75 that escaped went to Malaysia, were turned back because they're unaware of what was going on. Media, news outlet, and whatnot was not going on. So they told people to turn back around and get back on their boat and go back to where they were. That was just a lot of lives were lost that way. We were fortunate to eventually settle on an island called Balobidong in late 79 and 80. We were at that camp for quite a while. My entire family on my father's side came over. And then we were eventually sponsored by our cousin, my father's cousin, through, I believe it was the Catholic refugee program. So yeah, it's a long story, and I can sit here and continue to tell you all about it. There are lots of stories about that.
Thank you, Alex. And last but not least, Ayat, what is your immigrant story?
So, much like Stefanía and Alex, my family and I immigrated here because of armed conflict. My family was originally from Sudan. There was a ongoing, decades-long civil war happening, and my father was able to get asylum in the United States. And thanks to the help of some passionate lawyers and law students at the Yale Law Clinic, he was able to bring me, my sister, and my mother to the United States as well. We had a long and drawn-out path to citizenship, but eventually we got there. And now I hope to help other immigrants along that path as well and make it hopefully easier and less complicated.
Thank you, Ayat. And like you mentioned, I mean, a lot of you guys are involved in work that supports immigrant communities. Ayat, like you mentioned, you work with International House Now. Stefanía, you're with Carolina Migrant Network. Alex, you do work within the AAPI community. I want to start with you, Alex. Walk me through the work that you do and the type of services that you provide for the community.
Yeah, so representing the Vietnamese association, the Vietnamese community, we're the second largest ethnic group, or Asian ethnic group, I would say, in Mecklenburg County and surrounding areas. I would say Vietnamese population overall totals 1.3 million. That's roughly about 1% of the U.S. population. So what I do here is being a leader, a community leader, is I help my community navigate through either through language barriers, health and human services, or everyday life stuff. You mentioned that we were also working on the refugee aspect too. And we'll touch on that later in the program about that. But you mentioned earlier that I am working with Atrium Health, also developing a needs analysis survey for my community to see what's important to them and develop a curriculum around that to help my community.
Awesome. And Ayat, you're an immigration attorney at International House. Talk to us a little bit about the work you do there.
Absolutely. So the Immigration Law Clinic at International House helps support low-income immigrants in the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area on a pathway to citizenship. We also help qualifying immigrants and U.S. citizens unify with their family members living abroad. Our focuses primarily lie in family-based and humanitarian immigration, as well as naturalization.
Awesome. And last but not least, Stefanía, talk to us a little bit about the work that you do with Carolina Migrant Network.
Thank you. So the Carolina Migrant Network, our mission is to disrupt the deportation pipeline through direct legal deportation defense services and community organizer. We're currently the only legal nonprofit in the Carolinas that represents people who are detained. In North Carolina and South Carolina, we don't have long-term immigration detention facilities, and folks are sent to Georgia, where we see about a rate of 3% legal representation, whereas in Charlotte, it's about a 17% likelihood that people would be able to obtain legal representation when they're in removal proceedings. Apart from our legal services, we also focus on legislative advocacy and community organizing. We know that when our communities organize and understands their rights, and they also have access to free and reliable legal services, we can have a stronger community. And part of the reason we also engage in legislative advocacy is because, as we have seen recently within the North Carolina General Assembly and across the country in other states, there is an attempt to try to utilize state legislatures to essentially become immigration policymakers. And so we look at immigration holistically, not only in terms of what does it mean to be detained, what does our community need, and what is the pressure that we need to put on our legislative officials.
Awesome. Thank you all. Well, in the first weeks of office, we've seen President Trump issue a series of executive orders aimed at overhauling U.S. immigration policy. And these actions have included declaring a national emergency at the southern border, ending birthright citizenship. The Trump administration has also revoked policies that limited immigration enforcement at sensitive locations like churches and schools, basically meaning that ICE can now go into schools or churches to conduct raids or procedures. And some of these actions, like ending birthright citizenship, they have faced legal challenges recently in federal courts. So, Stefanía, I want to start with you. Last weekend, you hosted a community meeting to come up with a plan to protect undocumented immigrants from mass deportations here in Charlotte. How is Trump's promise of mass deportations impacting immigrants here in Charlotte locally?
Thank you. So certainly since January 20th, and even before that, right after the election, we know that many of our community members have felt panic and fearful for not only their future, but that of their children as well. A lot of the calls that we're receiving are from people who want to figure out what legal avenues there are for them, or what are power of attorneys that they can sign to make sure that their children in their homes are safe. And part of the goal through our community meetings is to get folks to understand that, yes, things may seem difficult right now. There's a clear strategy under Trump 2.0, just like there was under Trump 1.0, to create mayhem and fear and distrust of our local entities. And really thinking of, and having folks really think about the collective power we have. People know their neighbors. People know the other parents that send their children to school. And so we're really trying to encourage community members to think about the hyper-local impact we can have in our neighborhoods to try to combat that fear. Who are the folks who can take a child to school when mom and dad can't do it, or are fearful that there might be operations, or who can mom and dad count on to pick up groceries? These are real life situations that are happening on a daily basis for the past few weeks in our community. People are scared to do everyday actions. And what we're trying to encourage folks to understand is that we also have an opportunity to think about ways that we can protect ourselves when we know that, in a way, we are enduring state violence.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stefanía. Ayat, birthright citizenship in the United States is in jeopardy with President Donald Trump's executive order and its current battle in the courts. Explain to us a little bit about birthright citizenship and how it's protected under the 14th Amendment.
Of course. So the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, Section 1 states all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. The first part, all persons born or naturalized in the United States, is pretty simple. You can, everybody knows what that means. The second part, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, that's the part that typically gets litigated because there's some nuance there. And there could be alternative interpretations. So the Supreme Court has litigated this issue, has decided this issue in 1889 with a seminal case called United States versus Wong Kim Ark. And in that case, it cemented the way we conceptualize birthright citizenship as it exists today. In the United States versus Wong Kim Ark, the Supreme Court interpreted the 14th Amendment to mean that anyone who is born in the U.S. and subject to the laws of the U.S., as in they could be, put into jail or prison if they break the law, they could be deported, etc. They were therefore subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and subject to its laws. And so they could be considered U.S. citizens. In contrast, certain groups of people, like for instance, the children of diplomats would not be considered U.S. citizens because they're not bound by U.S. laws and are therefore not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. This is the point that President Trump is trying to attack with his executive order trying to repeal birthright citizenship. If it goes up to the Supreme Court, it's obviously being litigated now. There's been several organizations who have filed cases, and it will probably be a long, protracted battle. And if the Supreme Court grants certiorari, then it's possible that they could overrule or reinterpret the 14th Amendment to mean something else, or they could overrule United States versus Wong Kim Ark. However, there's longstanding precedent about this issue, and all immigrants, whether documented or on temporary visas or undocumented, they're all subject to the jurisdictions of the United States because they could be prosecuted for their crimes and deported. So that's the primary argument that many organizations are offering. And I tend to agree with it. I think ultimately there's so much precedent and several hundreds of years of law here that shouldn't be able to be overturned so easily.
And the United States isn't one of the only countries that has birthright citizenships. Can you talk a little bit about that, about other countries that you do know that do offer birthright citizenship?
I don't know that I could speak to other countries. I feel like the United States is unique in the sense that the way it conceptualizes birthright citizenship from the Reconstruction era, the 14th Amendment was the great equalizer. It made everyone equal, whether they came from slave ancestry or they came from a different background or they're an immigrant. I feel like very many countries have laws whereby you are the citizen of the country of your parents, either your mother or your father. The United States, however, because we went through such a sordid path with slavery, one of the major things after the Civil War was the Reconstruction period where they were rebuilding. And the 14th Amendment was integral in that. So in a way, we were trying to rebrand ourselves or make up for the faux pas that we committed and the atrocities that we committed. And I don't know that very many countries have birthright citizenship, but it remains to be seen.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ayat. And Alex, H-1B visas, they're in limbo with the Trump administration. As of Monday, news came out that Trump may revoke the extended auto renewal of H-1B work permits that was set under the Biden administration. And I know you've worked with a lot of the Asian community that are on H-1B visas. So what have you been hearing from them? What industries do they predominantly work in? Where are they from? If you could tell us a little bit more about all of that.
Yeah, thanks, Julian. Yeah, so the H-1B visa renewal, as you would know, it's a specialized skilled visa that requires a degree, mainly used in the tech sector and banking. Charlotte, if you look at the list, and this is public knowledge, North Carolina or Charlotte itself asks for roughly about 6,000 visa per year. You got to take into account that only USCIS allocates roughly 65 H-1B visas and then another 20 for master degrees. So out of 85,000, Charlotte or North Carolina is taking roughly a little bit under 8% or so of these visas. So talking to employers and employees, unless Trump is seeing some kind of forward thinking that these processes are going to be quicker, then I totally agree that, reverting it back to 180 days would be fine, totally fine. But if the application process takes longer, then the employee and the employer is at jeopardy of losing that skilled worker. Now they've got to find another skilled worker, a level of that peer level to hire to keep operations continuing. So that in itself, I think, is a fault. So with the all renewal, it's good and bad from what I'm feeling on that aspect of it.
Thank you, Alex. And I add to you, hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans on temporary protected status will not have their program renewed for them under new guidance from this Trump administration. Can you explain to us, for those who don't know, a little bit about what this program is and why it's so important for those seeking refuge here in the United States?
Sure, yeah. So the Homeland Security Secretary may designate a foreign country for TPS based on temporary conditions like ongoing conflict, environmental disasters, epidemics, or other extraordinary or temporary conditions that prevent nationals of that country from safely returning. TPS beneficiaries are protected from removal from the United States and can apply for and receive work authorization. Periodically, the Homeland Security Secretary has to review conditions of the country and determine whether they continue to meet the requirements for TPS. Secretary Noam, who just began with the Trump administration, was required to determine by February 1st of this year whether to extend or terminate the 2023 designation for Venezuela. In a notice from February 3rd, Secretary Noam determined that Venezuela no longer met the conditions for TPS and terminated its 2023 designation. She cited improvements in Venezuela's economy, public health, and public safety, and said that it allowed for Venezuelan nationals to return to their home country. And she also further concluded that continuation of TPS was contrary to the national interests of the United States. So because TPS offers protections and because a lot of the countries that are on TPS suffer from very unstable conditions, removing that protection puts people in a lot of uncertainty. They have virtually 60 days, the people who are registered under the 2023 designation, to find alternative means to get another status, another immigration status, or alternatively apply for asylum or leave the country. Because after the 60-day period is up, then they become unlawfully present in the United States. So consequently, on April 6th of this year, individuals who have been granted TPS under the 2023 Venezuelan designation will no longer have it, and they will lose all the benefits associated with it. They can be deported at that point, and they can also no longer work. But also to note, this termination does not apply to the 2021 designation of Venezuela for TPS. The 2021 designation remains in effect until September 10th, 2025. So people who are registered under the 2021 designation for TPS, they can still continue to work. They can still be here lawfully until that 2021 designation is reviewed by the Department of Homeland Security.
And what, aside from Venezuela, what other countries are designated as TPS?
So there's several countries. My home country, Sudan, is one of those countries. There's also Afghanistan, and I believe some of the TPS countries were removed recently, but I believe Sudan, Afghanistan, maybe Ukraine are still on there.
El Salvador too. We happen to
El
be
Salvador.
the largest country with recipients.
Awesome. Thank you to you both. Going to the state level now, House Bill 10, it was passed with a supermajority by the North Carolina Assembly in November, and it was put into effect in December 1st. It requires sheriffs to honor detainer requests from ICE and for undocumented immigrants in custody in county jails. Local law enforcement must hold these individuals flagged by ICE for up to 48 hours after their scheduled release, allowing for federal agents the chance to take them into custody. So Stefanía, for you, your organization, you guys have taken a strong stance against House Bill 10. Can you explain how this new law changes law enforcement's role in immigration enforcement?
Thank you. Before I do, I want to give some context on when we started seeing House Bill 10. It's really important to folks to know that up until the Trump administration, North Carolina had the highest numbers of sheriffs that were voluntarily collaborating with ICE. This meant that sheriffs were willingly contracting with ICE to deputize sheriff's agents within booking and processing to place people in deportation proceedings. After the 2018 sheriff's elections, voters overwhelmingly requested and pushed for candidates that would not honor these voluntary collaborations. I say that because in 2018, we saw the sheriffs of the largest counties in North Carolina do away with that voluntary collaboration, that being Mecklenburg, Guilford, Forsyth, Wake, Buncombe, and Durham County, which technically results to about, if you think about it, 3/4 of the North Carolina population. And so immediately we saw movement from the Charlotte ICE field office and collaboration with state legislators who wanted to mandate a collaboration between local law enforcement, sheriffs in this case, and ICE, something that's absolutely completely voluntary under state law in terms of honoring ICE detainers. So this has been a long-term battle. For years, immigrant rights organizers and advocates like myself have been able to fight back to stop House Bill 10 or HB 37 or the various iterations that we saw for this bill. And what's super important to note is that we have even seen divisions within the Sheriff's Association around their stance on this bill. We've seen them on various occasions take positions against the bill because the bill essentially makes our communities less safe. It makes it less likely for people to, one, trust law enforcement and report crime. It makes it so if there are civil rights violations, ICE is not on the hook for that, as was with the voluntary contractual agreement that sheriffs had back in 2018. They're all fiscal responsibility lies on the counties. Remember that the county commissioners are the ones that allocate budgets to sheriff's departments. And lastly, there's overwhelming research that shows that collaboration with local law enforcement is harmful to our community. Mecklenburg County was the first county east of the Mississippi to enter into a voluntary ICE partnership back in 2008 under Sheriff Pendergraph. And there's vast amounts of local research that shows us that by having collaboration with local law enforcement, children born to foreign-born mothers were more likely to be underweight, which we know that weight at childbirth has direct correlations with social outcomes. And we knew that at the end of the day, there was a lot of folks that were being placed in deportation proceedings and removed from our community who were not being allowed due process. And so a lot of our concern around this bill and the way that it's been packaged is as this crime prevention tool, when in reality, our concern is that people are being neglected and not allowed to pursue due process within county jails.
Yeah, and talk to us a little bit more about the effects of House Bill 10 specifically on immigrant communities. What is that relationship now between immigrants and local law enforcement?
Certainly. So the bill took effect in December of this past year. There has been a lot of concern of what does it mean to come into contact with local law enforcement. We know that as it was already under 287G from 08 to 2018, sorry, 07 to 2018, communities were very mindful of coming into contact with local law enforcement, be it for driving without a license or cross charges within domestic violence situations. There's certainly now even more distrust around what it means to just be out and in the community. I've given this example before. We run the ICE hotline for Mecklenburg County, and many of our calls that we've received are folks who are in situations where they don't know if they can call law enforcement. And so certainly this distrust is going to continue if law enforcement continues to participate either voluntarily or through House Bill 10, we're going to see more people distrust local government.
And how have local sheriffs and law enforcement officials here in Charlotte responded to House Bill 10? Has there been much of a change?
It's a great question. I think it varies per county to begin with. In Mecklenburg County, we're in a unique situation. We have the largest ICE field office for the Carolinas, just off of Tyrvilla Road, I'm sorry. And so we're in a different situation, but it certainly has varied. It's also important to note that sheriff's role is to enforce state and federal laws, right? They're not here to enforce civil immigration law. And so we're seeing a situation in where this bill has no training mechanism at all to be able to ensure that people don't face any civil rights violations when detained. And certainly it has varied throughout the state because there is no guidance currently from the Sheriff's Association on how to proceed with this bill.
Yeah, and 2 weeks ago, the Department of Justice said that it would investigate state and local law enforcement agencies who don't cooperate with ICE. Going to this point, have you seen any other differences with the Sheriff's Office or CMPD and the work that they do with immigrants?
Thank you. We have not seen any difference. I think what we have seen is a difference within our community and the trust that they have, not only in local law enforcement, but any other local government entity, which I think is part of the strategy within this administration, is to create distrust, ensure people aren't going to, in living, there's a saying in Spanish, la vida cotidiana, your everyday life. And so that is part of the strategy. It's also important to note that there is no federal law that mandates civil immigration enforcement collaboration. However, there are mechanisms for sheriffs who want to voluntarily participate in that. We know a perfect example of that is Sam Page out of Rockingham County. He was the chair of Trump's campaign team and has taken it upon himself to really promote Sheriff ICE collaboration across not only North Carolina, but the country as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And with this federal administration as well as state laws and bills that have passed in regards to immigration, there's been heightened fear in the immigrant community. And Know Your Rights initiatives, they've played a crucial role in empowering the immigrant communities during this time. We know a lot of nonprofit organizations here in Charlotte. They've hosted workshops, they've distributed materials, they've provided legal guidance on how to help immigrants kind of understand their rights when encountering law enforcement or ICE. Ayat and Stefanía, I want to ask the both of you, what rights does everyone, including undocumented immigrants, TPS holders, green card holders, even US citizens, what rights do they have under the Constitution?
I can start. Well, for one, you have the right to remain silent. That is always a right. You don't have to say anything because anything you say can and will be used against you. So if an officer asks for information, you don't have to provide that information. You can tell them, I'm exercising my right to be silent and I would like to contact the lawyer. Which brings me to the second point. You have the right to consult with an attorney before you speak to ICE officials or law enforcement. And you don't have to provide them any answers without your attorney present. If they ask to search you, you have the right to say, no, I don't consent to this search and seizure. I don't have, I don't want you to touch my things. I don't want you to search me. You do not have permission from me. If they come to your house, you have the right to not let them in unless they have a judicial warrant signed by a judge or magistrate that states your name and your address and gives permission for them to enter your home and retrieve you. So if, ICE officials or law enforcement knock on your door and they don't have a warrant, you don't have to let them in. You don't have to comply. You can have them slide the warrant under the door if they do have one, and you could take a look at it and make sure it's signed by a judge, make sure that it has your name and your address, and see the scope of what the warrant discusses. And then, if you want, comply with the warrant.
I'd only just add that regardless of your immigration status or lack thereof, you are protected under the Constitution for these rights that I just mentioned. One of the tools that we're encouraging family members to do is to carry around a red card. This is a card, Julian reported on it, I believe this just a few days ago. And it's a card that reminds people of their constitutional rights, and in one side in their native language, and then on another side, it says so in English, so folks don't have to engage in conversation. One of the difficult parts about giving these Know Your Rights conversations is that there is, we tell folks, right, what their constitutional rights are, and then there is fear. There's fear that exists around the intimidation tactics that are used by immigration officers. So we try to remind folks that ensuring that you remain silent and state that you will remain silent is your best tool. It is your best tool to be able to protect yourself. One of the other things that we tell folks during our Know Your Rights clinics and other events that we host with community members is that under the North Carolina law, you have the right to, we have what's called one-party consent for recording. Your phone, or if somebody's witnessing a detention, can be a fantastic tool to document. We really encourage folks to document ICE interactions. Not only is it helpful for us to understand as community partners to understand what's going on in a neighborhood, but also for the individual in the case of detention, that documentation can be shared with an attorney in the case that there are civil rights violations.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I know you have more information on Know Your Rights and different ways that people can learn about the rights that they have.
Yeah, so there's several organizations who are doing this work right now because it's so critical, especially with the Trump administration's harsh stance against immigrants and immigration in general. So one of the major organizations who are spearheading this work is the ACLU. They have several resources in different languages that span different scenarios. So they give you an outline of your rights if you're detained by ICE, if you're stopped by an ICE officer, if someone comes to your door, if you're at a protest. I would highly recommend checking out their website. There's also other organizations like Ayala and Clinic that have great resources, again, in various languages, and you can get access to their materials just by going on their websites. They typically have flyers in multiple languages, and they give you very detailed explanations based on the specific situation you find yourself in. In addition, there's a great organization called NECASEC that developed a Know Your Rights app. It's currently on iPhone. It's called Know Your Rights for Immigrants. It is free and it's available in over 16 languages. It has several different resources on the app, such as legal resources and directories, so you can find a lawyer if you find yourself in that situation. There's also an option, in addition to telling you what your rights are specifically, there's also an option to notify your friends and family in case you get detained or are stopped by an officer. They also have a ICE detainee directory where you can find if your friend or relative has been detained. It's a wonderful app. They're currently working on putting it on Androids, but as of the current moment, it is only available on Apple iPhones. And I would highly recommend that people download it and take a look through it. It is very helpful. It's easy to use. In addition, NECASEC has a 24/7 immigration hotline The number is stated on that slide. They have help 24/7 in both English and Korean. And if you call them with your situation, they guarantee that they will try to find you some resources and help you on the path to getting relief for yourself, for your friend, for your family member, or whoever's in the situation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ayat. Alex, I wanted to turn to you and ask, how are you ensuring that refugee communities, especially those with language barriers, have access to all of this legal information during this time? I think you're on mute.
Besides social media, really the biggest form of communication is just passing the word from family member to family member and just being aware. We do have groups out there in the community that run nonprofit organizations that do know your rights, even do like citizenship workshops. SEAC is a prime example that helped the Southeast Asian coalition here in Charlotte. They've got lawyers on hand and knowledgeable people. Um, you know, ensuring is gosh, that's a tough challenge, Julian. I don't know if I can ever ensure that my community will have the necessary tools to combat what's going on in the community, but I'll do my darnest to make sure that the awareness is out there.
Awesome, thank you. And Stefanía, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about a recent initiative from Carolina Migrant Network. This is something that you did in the first Trump administration, but now you've kind of brought back, and it's verifying ICE activity in the area. If you could talk to us a little bit about that and the way that it's helping during this time.
Thank you. So we have launched a Mecklenburg County ICE hotline, an ICE support hotline. Essentially what happens is, unfortunately, we're in the era of social media, and it is both a curse and a blessing. And what we know is happening is that people are circulating in good faith videos of ICE apprehensions, maybe in North Carolina or maybe elsewhere across the country. And these videos are being sent around, and people are fearful of leaving their homes. So we have launched our Amigos en Resistencia, Friends in Resistance campaign, which is training citizen allies to bear witness, to essentially be legal observers in the case of detentions. We encourage people to call the hotline, make sure that folks are calling us as incidents are occurring, so we're able to send trained essential legal observers to document the situations and understand what type of tactics ICE is using. The reason we do this is because a lot of people are fearful of law enforcement in general, as I've mentioned. We want to make sure that folks know that there is a line that they can call, not only to report ICE activity in the city, but also if they have questions about their rights. We want to make sure that people know that there is a community organizations that is fluent in Spanish primarily, that can respond to some of those questions. And similar to the application that Ayat mentioned, we also have seen situations in the past with people who are trying to find their loved ones. It usually takes a couple of days to be able to locate somebody as they're being moved into detention centers. And so we help folks navigate the ICE detainee locator to be able to find their loved ones. So it's a tool we're recommending folks to utilize, and it's also an opportunity for community members to show up for others who don't feel like they have the ability to leave their home because they're fearful that ICE might be around the corner.
Awesome, thank you. And Alex, I wanted to go to you because you've also mentioned that in your work, you work with a refugee resettlement program. I wanted to know if you can talk to us a little bit about this program and the initiatives that you're focused on through this work during this time.
Well, it's a shame with the new executive order that is putting a temporary ban on accepting refugees into the country. I was on the phone and talking to a few people just recently that our application that was in process for a year and a half now is no longer valid. So we work through a company called Welcome Corpus, along with the Christian Refugee and a couple other nonprofits here that do the resettlement program. And just hearing that news just totally broke my heart just a couple of days ago. You know, being a descendant of a refugee family, um, I'm just lost for words. I mean, that, you know, that's what makes America great is I was given the opportunity, you know, 40 something years ago to come over here to start a new life, um, to call this great country my country, you know what I mean? But now apparently that's wrapped up in all this dart throwing that I categorize it as dart throwing because we're throwing things on the board to see what sticks. And it's causing so much fear in my community with, you know, with some of the um, convicted criminals that had green cards and now revoked because they have orders to remove. Um, you know, I can't remember back when, but in 1995, there was a memorandum of understanding in 1995 that any refugee status of Vietnamese descent were not forced to be sent back to their country of origin or back to Vietnam because of the conflict, because of the prosecution, and you know, basically that's a death sentence sending them back to Vietnam. But I'm hearing that some of my community members are being sent back that came in prior to 1995. So, you know, it's a touchy subject. It's one that I hope that the administration will really um, fix what they need to fix. You know, we're wrapped up into it's we're wrapped into Cuba, Indochina. I mean, it's affecting the southern borders. It's just something that I just hate that happened. And now with what we were planning to do and give these families an opportunity to resettle here legally, as you would understand, coming through the legal way, they classified it as humanitarian parole, and it's almost like a TPS. But all that is null and void. It's no longer U.S. is no longer accepting refugees. You know, I don't know if you know the difference between a refugee and asylum seeker, right? Refugee is that you're already classified by the UN or by some country that you are because of certain conflict, you're on a waiting list to come to America as a refugee status. Where asylum, you've got to cross that border, then apply and seek residence or seek asylum in that country. So yeah, more to come. Hopefully, I can update you with some better news after this they decide what to do with this executive order.
Thank you so much, Alex. I wanted to turn to you and ask a little bit about what International House is doing to reunify families. What types of initiatives do you focus on there during this time?
Sure. So at International House, we primarily focus on I-130 petitions for immediate relatives of U.S. citizens residing abroad, I-730 petitions for immediate relatives of asylees and refugees, one-step adjustments for immediate relatives of U.S. citizens that are already residing in the U.S., and visa consular processing for all of the above-mentioned cases. Immediate relatives include spouses, parents, and unmarried children under the age of 21.
And why is family reunification so important in the type of work that you're doing?
I mean, I think from a humanitarian standpoint and a human standpoint, nobody wants to be alone in a foreign country without their family. You know, people's situations force them to leave their countries. Nobody leaves their home country willingly without being prompted to do so. You know, there's typically some unstable situations going on, whether it's armed conflict or lack of economic opportunities or any other reason preventing them from staying in their home country. And so they immigrate to have a better future for themselves and for their families. And it's really important for these people to have a sense of community and family and to have their loved ones close. You can't function in any country, whether a foreign country or even your home country, while you're worried about the conditions back home and what your family is facing. So we take that work very seriously. We try to help people and immigrants like my own family come together and have that holistic family structure that ultimately enriches lives. I don't think that being without your family for a very long time is pleasant for anyone. So it's very important work, I think, from a human standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ayat. Before we end this conversation, I want to know if there's anything from you guys, the panelists, any other organizations, initiatives, aside from the ones that you all work with, that you can share that support immigrants, that help immigrants out during this time. Alex, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so locally there are a handful of Vietnamese speaking attorneys here that will work and help you. If you need their contacts, please reach out to me, and I'll be more than happy to provide them. On a national basis, the American Immigration Lawyer Association, that's a great resource too. They also provide some pro bono work that could get you into the right connections.
Ayat, well, how about you?
Yeah, so there are great organizations on the national level, but also on the local level that are doing this work. Carolina Migrant Network of, we're blessed to have Stefanía here today who co-founded it. They have upcoming Know Your Rights trainings on February 12th and March 12th from 7 to 9. And I'm sure, Stefanía, you could speak a little bit more about that. The Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy has an upcoming training scheduled for March 7th from 2 to 4 p.m. at the CCLA office. And then the Latin American Coalition, or LAC, has ID workshops on the second and third Thursday of each month from 12:30 to 2 at the LAC office, where they provide photo identification for immigrants who don't want to carry their passport or government-issued ID from their home countries with them. It's not recommended for immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, to carry their home country passport or government ID, because ICE needs to know which country you're from in order to deport you. It is ICE's burden to prove that you are a foreign national and from which country you hail from. So I would not make it easy for them by giving them knowledge of that willingly. So these IDs are a great tool to have, government identification that is widely recognized, but doesn't give ICE the opportunity to learn where you're from so that they can easily deport you.
Awesome. And last but not least, Stefanía.
Yeah, I will say, we are taking an approach where we want to be collaborative. Everyone wants to know your rights information. And what we're trying to do is be strategic around the areas of town that we're offering. Ayat mentioned the February 12th event. That is actually an event that's going to be sponsored by 10 different organizations, including ourselves, including Círculo de Luz, Latin American Coalition, the Hispanic Federation, the Center for Social Justice, and so many more. I can't think of them all right now. But I want to just also echo what Ayat said, especially for legal services. Super, super shout out to the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy. I know some of the questions that have come in are around power of attorneys. They are the leading organization for that here in Mecklenburg County. I also want to highlight that if you are also looking for an attorney, please know that the Mecklenburg County Bar is this option that you can utilize as well to find attorneys. It's also super important. We're hearing, unfortunately, when people are distressed, they're distressed, they're looking for options. And we're seeing a lot of notaries taking advantage of people. So just want to mention that too. Please reach out to credible organizations that have a rapport with our communities, because the last thing we want is for people to fall victim to people who are trying to make a profit off of them.
Well, thank you so much to the three panelists. We would now like to open the floor to our attendees to ask any questions that they may have. So we got a few. So I'll start with the first one. Stefanía, you quickly just spoke right now about getting a power of attorney. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is and why is that so important for immigrants?
So power of attorney is a document where someone gives another person the ability to make decisions, whether that be for your child, to take custody of your child, your home, or your finances. A lot of folks are actually going to notary publics to get documentation notarized, but we're truly encouraging folks to reach out to organizations like the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy to get those power of attorneys done. The reason so is if you think about it, power attorneys are essentially estate planning, right? You're preparing for a crisis to happen and for somebody to be able to execute actions on your behalf. And so just really want to mention that because sometimes you want to make sure that a power of attorney is drafted correctly to your specific needs. And we know that the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy is working with attorneys to create those power of attorney documents in the case that there is a detention and deportation. And then, sorry, lastly, I would just add, apart from the power of attorneys, one of the things that we're strongly encouraging folks to do is not only to get their children their US passports if they're US citizens, but also to ensure that they become dual citizens from their parents' home country in the event that there is a separation and there is a need for reunification.
Awesome, thank you. And the next question is if you can clarify the rules, law around a bystander using a phone to document an interaction. What does one-party consent mean?
Guys, that's my favorite question. So in the state of North Carolina, if you are a party in an interaction, you only need the consent of that one party to document. And so I'll give you an example. I'm hanging out with my friends. We're having a great time and I decide to record. I am part of that party. So therefore I myself have given consent to record the interaction. And so since North Carolina is a one-party consent state, we encourage folks that if they are safe and able, please record any type of interaction with immigration officials so we can utilize that information.
Perfect. And the next question is, what do you recommend local police departments in North Carolina do to maintain trust with our immigrant community?
Is that for me?
It could be for anybody. Any of the three panelists.
I can speak to my community. It's just having someone of the same skin color be represented in that community. You know, there are only just a handful of Vietnamese or just total Asian officers in CMPD. You know, I can't speak for the Hispanic community, but you know, knowing that CMPD is on an all-time shortage of cadets also. So, you know, try to be in that community. I know it's a lot of fear, a lot of stigma with the police. You know, you see the police. And back in my youth, you think, oh, you're in trouble, even though you haven't done anything. And as an adult, I still kind of get that pre-notion. But yeah, to the law enforcement, just having them having the same skin color um, does play a big role in lowering that level of fear.
Is there anything else that Stefanía or Ayat?
I just think it's a uphill battle, you know?
And the next question is if there's any volunteer opportunities from any of the agencies represented by the panelist or maybe any other organizations in Charlotte where allies can help out.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I mean, at International House, we're always looking for volunteers. We're always looking for a helping hand. There's several, because International House is a big organization that does various things. I only work in the legal clinic, which is one part of it. There's various roles that people can volunteer in. I would encourage them to listen or to reach out to our volunteer coordinator, Lauren Rogers, and to do the sign-up sheet on the website if they're interested.
I would echo the same. If you guys are interested in volunteering with us, you can reach out to Daniela Andrade. All our emails are the first name and carolinamigrantnetwork.org. You don't have to be an attorney or an immigration attorney. We are preparing to launch our bond network for attorneys who are interested in representing people who are detained. You don't have to be an immigration attorney to do so. We provide trainings and CLEs to be able to train folks to partake and support folks through that. But we also have other opportunities. We host asylum clinics on a quarterly basis to help folks fill out their asylum application free of charge. And we also do a lot of canvassing. We know that part of the concern right now is people are not sending their children to school, maybe not going to church, or going to the grocery store. So we're trying to go straight to them and provide know your rights information right in their neighborhoods so they can be best informed.
And the next question is, if you are a naturalized citizen or a US citizen, is it advised that you carry a copy or a photo of your passport with you just in case you're targeted by ICE?
I would say if you're being targeted, that might look like racial profiling.
Ayat, is there anything that you want to add on that?
So as long as you're carrying a government issued ID, you should be fine. If you carry your driver's license, that serves as an identifying document as well. If you're not a U.S. citizen, like say you're a legal permanent resident, we advise you to carry your green card. But as a U.S. citizen, your ID should suffice.
And I'll just flag, ICE is a civil enforcement entity, right? Often the case we've heard of situations of ICE trying to ask for identification or pass themselves as other types of law enforcement. Just really important for folks to know that if you're being detained for whatever reason, you have the right to ask what type of agency is making that stop. And absolutely, I would be, if you are a victim of racial profiling, that's certainly something we'd like to know.
And the next question has to do with Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools and its response to whether or not ICE can go and enter on school campuses. So this person asked, what can CMS realistically do to protect our students from ICE?
I'll just say ICE can't willy-nilly go into a school, y'all. You still need a warrant signed by a judge. I think that's the number one thing to note. I think the best thing the CMS can do right now is train all their principals and administrative staff on the difference between an administrative warrant, a judicial warrant, both a federal judicial warrant and a state warrant, because we don't want there to be any confusion around what those documents look like, because there can be significant repercussions if so.
Yeah, I agree with Stefanía. With most public spaces, ICE cannot enter any private spaces beyond just the initial public space, like for instance, the lobby. They have to have permission to enter those spaces. So in schools, ICE might be able to walk into your school and go straight to the lobby, but unless they have a warrant signed by a judge describing, the permissions that they have and who they're looking for, and having that address of that school, you don't have to let them into the private areas. That includes the classroom. So you can exercise your right to say no. You don't have a judicial warrant. We're not going to let you in. That is totally fine. If they do have a judicial warrant, of course you have to comply. But ICE often brings up administrative warrants and tries to pass them off as judicial warrants. It's important for people to know what they look like Stefanía said, so that you can differentiate between the two. And if they have an administrative warrant, you don't have to comply. It has to be signed by a judge or a magistrate. It has to spell out the circumstances, who they're looking for, have the address. It has to be very specific. You only have to comply within the parameters of that warrant.
And if I can just add, there's been a shock factor around the removal of locations, be it a school, a place of worship, or a hospital, there are still protocols that can be put in place. And I just want to make that known, because under the last 4 administrations, what is it? Obama, Bush, Obama, Biden, and Trump. These are all have been memos, right? This is not necessarily law. However, judicial warrants still are necessary to enter.
Thank you. And the next question comes from a person who works at the public library and serves a lot of immigrants. She says that they receive a lot of requests for help with legal forms. For example, one woman needed help to ensure she was completing the correct form for readopting her child in America. What organization is the best to provide quick assistance in terms of filling out legal forms?
I would say you have to be very careful with that, because you could fall into a situation where you're doing unlawful practice of law. So I just want to mention that really quickly. I would recommend strongly that you reach out to the local nonprofits that provide legal representation to immigrants, be it the International House or the Charlotte Center for Legal Advocacy, who could provide better guidance on how to handle the situation.
Awesome, thank you. And we also wanted to remind everybody here that you can put your questions in the Q&A. So if you do have any more questions, there's a Q&A button at the bottom that you can click and type your question there. The next question we have is there a spot or a place where somebody can see that they have a deportation order written against them?
So yes, there is. If you are before the Charlotte or before immigration court, there is a 1-800 number that you can call. You can also go to the EOIR website, the executive, I'm going to butcher it, but essentially it's EOIR is immigration court. And there is a profile where you can place what's called your A number, which is a 9-digit identifier that all foreign nationals who have come into contact with or have some sort of registry, I guess I would say, with immigration officials have. I'm happy to put the link in the chat.
Awesome, thank you. And another one for Stefanía. If you know of similar hotlines or ICE response resources in other counties in North Carolina, for example, Wake County.
Yes, there are 4 ICE hotlines across the state. We handle the Mecklenburg County hotline. You also have CIMA, Compañeros Inmigrantes de las Montañas, that cover Asheville and Hendersonville. Siembra that cover Durham, Guilford, and Forsyth. And then you also have Radar Safe that is in Wake County. SEAC Village actually just did a post earlier today that lists all the ICE hotlines in the state. That is something I encourage you all to look at and share with your networks.
Awesome. And you mentioned the need for a judge-signed warrant. Must the judge or magistrate be a federal judge or magistrate or be a state judge and sign a warrant for ICE? This can either go to Stefanía or Ayat.
It could be either, as long as it's a judge, magistrate.
Yeah, I would also add, it has been my experience that and Ayat mentioned that it's extremely unlikely that you will actually see a judicial warrant, be it from the feds or be it from district court, but that is utilized by ICE. Often what we see are either deportation orders or ICE detainers or some sort of ICE administrative warrant that is signed by an ICE agent, not a judge. And that is actually something we incorporate to our Know Your Rights. We have large blown up pictures of what the various documents look like because there is a distinct visual, they just look very different, right? And so you may not be able to maybe understand what's written, but you're able to clearly see the difference in the documents.
And the next question, how do you check if anyone you know has been detained by ICE? Is there a way to look?
So there is on that Know Your Rights for Immigrants app, there is an ICE detainee directory where you can look up to see if a relative or friend or anyone you know has been detained.
Awesome. And we're getting a question about TPS in Venezuela. Was TPS extended for Venezuelans?
So originally, under the Biden administration, it was extended, but then recently, and a couple days ago, actually, Secretary Noam determined that Venezuela no longer meets the TPS designation requirements, at least the 2023 designation. So that has been terminated, and the termination will take effect on April 6th, 2025. So very shortly thereafter. The 2021 designation does remain in effect until September 10th, 2025, at which point the Secretary of Homeland Security will revisit it and review the country conditions and determine whether or not they continue to meet the requirements for TPS.
And another question, would it be helpful for allies to attend any of the upcoming trainings that were just mentioned?
I think so. I think, the more people that are aware of what their rights are, the more people that are aware of, the limits of ICE and what they can and cannot do under the law, the less misinformation there is out there. And the more people feel empowered because they know what, they're entitled to, what their rights are, and what they do and don't have to put up with.
I would agree, and I would also share that we have trainings specific to citizen allies that not only go over your Know Your Rights, but ways that you can also document what is going on with ICE. So I really encourage you all to check out our social media for those upcoming trainings.
And to that point, where can a white Anglo-Saxon citizen who is concerned about the issues facing immigrants volunteer to be helpful?
You can do so many things, y'all. I will say, I really encourage you all to reach out to local immigrant rights and immigrant serving organizations. There are plenty of ways that you can support, apart from Carolina Migrant Network, the Vietnamese Association, International House. There's other great organizations like RSS, Bridge, Despierta, that also are providing services to the families that they work with. So it could be something as simple as helping distribute Know Your Rights cards to helping ensure that they can call families to make sure that they are sending their kids to school. There's various ways that you can plug in.
Yeah, Alex, is there any other ways that you guys can think of?
I would just echo what Stefanía said. There's a lot of great organizations, including, Carolina Migrant Network and International House, and in the Charlotte area, where you can volunteer and lend your time and your services. That is valuable. Having volunteers and having people who care from all different backgrounds is really important to the work that we do, because we can't do it all alone. I mean, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of people that need help, and the more hands, the merrier.
Another question, what happens with funds kept at banks if you do get deported?
The funds are still yours. That's why we recommend getting a power of attorney. But unless the funds were of criminal act, then they could be seized by or frozen by the U.S. government. But it's still your money. So if you were deported and there's a national or a bank in the region, you still have access to your funds.
Stefanía, yeah, is there anything else that you'd like to add on that? We are getting another question about TPS and Venezuela. Ayat, if you could just clarify the two designations, the 2021 one and the 2023 one, what makes them different?
So what makes them different is basically the designation that you applied for TPS under. So if you applied for TPS under the 2021 designation, then your TPS is still valid until at least September 10th of this year, where it will then be revisited. If you applied based on the 2023 designation, then that designation was terminated and the termination will take effect on April 6th. So those who were granted work authorization and temporary protected status based on that most recent designation, those people have to seek alternate immigration statuses, or by April 6th of this year, they will be considered unlawfully present in the United States. They will no longer have work authorization. They will no longer have protection from deportation. And if they are caught by an ICE officer, they may be deported to Venezuela.
Awesome. We're getting another question. What can actually happen if you are detained? So what is the process once you are detained?
So there are two ways that you can, well, for various ways, but the two most common ways that you can be detained are either if you've come into contact with local law enforcement through HB 10, and or if you are apprehended during an ICE operation or an ICE raid in the community. Like I mentioned previously, North Carolina, we do not have long-term immigration detention facilities. We, unfortunately, all our community members are sent out of state lines into Georgia, and depending on bed space, sometimes as far as Louisiana or Mississippi, and usually in corporate, privately owned detention facilities that our government contracts with. It varies per case, but if somebody is detained and is not intimidated into either signing their own deportation order, which can be the case, there is a process for which folks can request bond and other types of immigration relief depending on the case, or if they've expressed fear to return to their home country. But again, I want to mention the fact that under immigration law, because it is akin, or immigration court, because it is akin to like IRS, like IRS civil law, we are not, folks are not entitled to an attorney. And so though they can request one, they will not be granted one. A family would have to either find a nonprofit that represents people in detention centers, or pay for a private immigration attorney.
And to that point about immigration court, we just had a question. I volunteered to be an observer in immigration court. Is that still being done now?
That's a great question. For background, prior to COVID and under the Obama administration as well, and part of the Trump administration, there were a group of volunteers that would go and document the interactions of judges in the Charlotte Immigration Court. We do have an immigration court that covers both of the Carolinas. It is what's considered a non-detained court, meaning that it adjudicates cases of people who are not at detention centers or who have been released. And the operation actually came about because there was a judge, immigration judge, his name was Couch, or his last name was Couch, who received national attention for essentially verbally abusing a child and threatening him to have him be fed to his dogs in Spanish because he was fluent. And as a result, that is how the Court Watch program started. There have been various changes to the program. To my knowledge, the only entity that is providing that is actually Wake Forest law. there have been various changes to who is allowed to enter the jail to begin with. The court.
What are some benefits of that being an observer on immigration court?
Oh God, there are a lot of benefits. Just like there are benefits to documenting ICE activity, we're able to see trends within the immigration court system. Immigration courts, one of the things that the Trump administration did early on was actually fire some of the immigration judges and appoint some himself. And so it allows us to be able to document the treatment of immigrants, and then also not only that the judgment, the treatment that the judges give those in removal proceedings, but also the U.S. attorneys. So it's a great tool to document and to be able to have that information.
Thank you. Ayat, this question is for you. I'm Venezuelan and my status is good until April 2nd because my TPS isn't valid anymore. Do I have to leave by April 2nd or do I actually have 60 days after that? So basically, can they leave on June 2nd is the question.
Okay, so the termination of TPS can't take effect until it's published in the Federal Register. And once it's published in the Federal Register, the notice must be included. There has to be a period for public comment, which is a 60-day period before the termination becomes effective, meaning people have time to give feedback on the decision, specifically 60 days. The 2023 designation was published on February 3rd, a few days ago, which is why it will take effect on, or the termination of the vacatur will take effect on April 6th. However, we also anticipate litigation. You know, in the previous administration, efforts were made to vacate TPS designations, and they were heavily litigated. So, you know, I would say wait, watch how the situation unfolds. And in the meantime, you know, see if you look into asylum, see if you qualify for asylum or any other immigration statuses, if anything else applies to you. But we anticipate that most of this will be litigated as it was in the first term. So there's a chance it might not be vacated exactly on April 6th. There's a chance it's extended while, you know, the ongoing litigation ensues, but we'll have to wait and see. Nobody knows at this point.
Another question in the chat. Any chance that these executive orders might be stopped or challenged in court? For example, the cancellation of the Biden extension of TPS for Venezuelans by the Trump administration.
Yes, maybe not all, but most of the executive orders are being challenged as we speak. You know, several organizations have filed lawsuits on the major ones, birthright citizenship. There are other organizations that are considering lawsuits for the TPS designation for Venezuela. I think litigation is going to be a very big part of the next 4 years. Most of the stuff that Trump does they take a pretty hard line and a hard stance, and some of them violate the Constitution or already existing laws. So I think there's a good chance that, you know, litigation will continue and it will continue to be a very big part of how these executive orders are unfurled and how they actually are enforced.
And this one we have in the chat as well. Are Ukrainians in danger of being deported? I know Ukraine is under the TPS designation, so I'm not sure if that pertains to that question.
I would just say broadly, I think that anybody who does not have a clear path to U.S. citizenship should be talking to an attorney to have an understanding of what avenues they have. This includes people with TPS. This includes people who came in through parole in place or are documented. So I think just generally, we're seeing essentially the sort of blitz attack from the federal government on various statuses that exist. So in general, right now is the time to go to an attorney that practices immigration law. to understand how to move forward with your individual case.
Ayat, is there anything that you want to mention on that?
Yeah, I would just second what Stefanía said. Anyone with a temporary immigration status should be looking at more permanent options. TPS obviously depends on the country's conditions. If your country's conditions change at any point, your TPS may be vacated, terminated, and then you have a very short period of time to figure out what to do next. Same with asylum, although this happens less often. If your country's conditions change drastically and it's a safe place, asylum may also be revoked for that country. So it really depends on the situation in the country and the country's conditions. But if you have any sort of temporary immigration status like TPS or DACA or are undocumented, I would look at your options and see if there's ways to gain a more permanent long-term immigration status that does have a pathway to citizenship so that you are better protected against these sorts of changes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to the three of y'all. We'd like to thank you for sharing your insights this evening. We've covered so many important topics relating to the challenges and opportunities that face the immigrant communities here in Charlotte, and there's so much more to discuss. An hour and a half didn't do it justice. There could be so much more that can be spoken on immigration. We encourage everyone to stay informed and engaged on these topics moving forward. On our website, you can go to wfae.org/immigration resource guide. And there we have a list of resources from various organizations, as well as if you would like to volunteer for those organizations, you can go to those links as well. That link to our website at wfae.org, that link is in our chat. And we'd like to thank you all for coming and hope that you all have a great evening. Thank you so much.